come on in. We don't.
Yeah, but it's not like that right now. So the border is as secure as it was in Trump under Trump, except for the fact that they don't have the Remain in Mexico policy. Can you name one policy that's different, or one initiative that's going on?
All I know is I've been seeing all the hearings of Mayorkas and all the charts and all the stats is that it's at record numbers right now.
That's such a good question. I don't know if you realize this, but wait, which one of you was that?
Yeah, it was me.
That was you. Are you the debater guy? Have you gotten any credit? No, I'm just kidding. It's such an effective question, and it shuts down so much conservative stuff when you're like, people will say, Trump did so much for the middle class. What did he do?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what's the policy? What are we even talking about? And then the answer is like, well, he was almost going to say, like, I've seen a ton of, I think he almost wanted to say tweets or headlines or TikTok videos. And then he's like, all the stats. Which ones? What are you talking
exactly.
about? Do you, when you're arguing with people like that, where's your line for how much of an asshole you want to be on holding somebody to a point?
I think I should do it more often. Like, I don't think I do it enough. Yeah, I think I kind of let them get away with it sometimes.
Yeah, and usually these discussions, it's like they're so fast paced and there's more people involved. So like somebody else jumps in and it quickly transitions to another topic. So it's not always easy, but I agree with that. Like I think we should try to do
like slam my fist down, be like, no, I want you to answer. Yeah. Like I feel like I did that with Alex Jones a little bit. But he was he was somebody that would do it to me. So
it's lost with Alex Jones because he's so over the top, like talks over, yells and shouts.
There are definitely, I agree. I feel like I need to do it more sometimes, but there are definitely times in debates where I'll be like, I'll ask the same question 2 or 3 times and they keep rambling and I'll cut them off, be like, listen, you can finish, but I want to re-ask the exact same question when you finish because you're not answering. Yeah. But it's a really you look really aggressive and everybody becomes very hostile towards you because you're trying to pin them down a lot. But it is really frustrating when you're in shows where these guys are like informing large audiences and you keep saying Trump has better policies. Trump is, okay, well, what did he do? Yeah. I think I brought this up to Ben Shapiro. It's very frustrating that 2 things. One, it's frustrating that we've had like decades where a Democrat has to come into office cleaning up the mess of the chaos left behind, whether it was Obama coming in on the heels of the housing crisis or Biden coming in on the heels of Corona. It's very frustrating that when you talk to conservatives, rightfully so, and I agree with them, they'll be like, you can't really blame Trump for his last year in office. And I was like, okay, I can kind of get behind that. It was a monumental event. I still think he'd be really critical of how he handled it. But then how am I supposed to judge Biden when all of his presidency is in the wake of COVID-19? Exactly. Because inflation, worldwide shipping, supply stuff, everything was heavily impacted by COVID-19 around the world. And then when people bring up immigration numbers, they're very quick to bring up, oh, well, Trump did this and blah, blah, blah. And it was Title 42, I think, that allowed him because of COVID-19 to shut down the border completely. Biden tried to, again, and they wouldn't let him. He can't use that anymore.
Well, and the thing with that, Title 42, so Trump, I think he had like 900,000, almost 1 million confrontations at the border or whatever you want to call them. And then Title 42 was encounters. And then Title 42 was put in place and it dropped way down to like 200,000. But he still had that 900, almost 1 million the year prior. When Title 42 was in place for, I don't know how long it was a couple of years, right? The backlog of people, it just kept building and building at the border. So when Title 42 was taken out, it had to have been taken out. It wasn't a national health emergency anymore. When that was taken out, you had this backlog, and that's what we're seeing right now. Combined with other, like geopolitical things in Central America and South America. But people, of course, ignore that and they blame Biden when Biden hasn't really changed anything. What Remain in Mexico, I think that kept 70,000 people out, in 2 years.
Yeah. It's always good to push on numbers when people cite certain policies too. You don't want to be the guy in a debate being like, source, because it sounds shitty. But people will cite a policy and like, what about this thing? Like he did that. And I was like, okay, what was the actual impact? I remember, I think it was for Vancouver in Canada. I'm going to butcher this. I need to look this up so I can remember. But they did something to where they made it illegal for foreign owners to not rent a unit out because people were blaming Chinese people for buying up units and never renting them. So they got rid of that, or they increased the tax not to make it really hard to do. And I think in the entire city of Vancouver, it brought 100 units online. It was basically there's millions, there's no impact whatsoever. And people will cite certain immigration things like, what about this or that? And it's like, this barely affects anybody. Right. Like you said, I think the majority of illegals in the United States, I think are still majority here based on overstaying visas. Yep. Right? Or people will talk about drugs and stuff that come into the United States. I haven't done my deep dive research on this yet, but I know a lot of it comes in via air, via sea, and via ports of entry, like disguised as other stuff. Like, are the majority of drugs in the United States really coming through people, running through the desert over through a porous border?
Right. Because like how much can you carry on you? Like it's in trucks and or like I guess on planes, maybe not drugs.
So going back to where you said Trump doesn't get the blame for COVID, the job numbers that crashed, the stock market that crashed, but inflation's blamed on Biden. Most of these people have no idea how that whole economic system works. Do they realize that inflation is a global event that's taking place because there was no supply, and because when everything reopened, the demand spiked when supply was at record lows? Like, if you know basic economics, it's where supply meets demand, and supply and demand. If there's not enough supply to meet that demand, prices have nowhere to go but up. And then they say, oh, Biden gave the stimulus check, so he pumped all his money into the economy, and that caused prices to go up. Didn't Trump do the same thing? I think Trump actually made sure that his signature was on those checks, taking credit for doing the exact same thing.
For the 1,400, right? And I think PPP was under Trump as well, right?
Yeah.
The PPP loans.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating that usually when a bad thing happens, usually there were incentives leading up to it, but leading up to it, usually it's really awesome. Being obese sucks, but becoming obese is awesome because you get to eat a ton of horrible shit and be lazy all the time. That's amazing. And it was frustrating. This is especially true under Obama. Like, the Democrats in the economy under Obama had to deal, that was in the wake of the housing crisis, and people will be critical of that. Or maybe if they're really fair, they'll be like, okay, well, we can't necessarily blame Obama for that and like all this. But then you also have to keep in mind, a lot of the credit that you get for Bush's economy was the run up to that. Or for Donald Trump having his monumental, growth in the economy, that was also under historically really low interest rates, which also plays into inflation and stuff. Yeah. Donald Trump was literally tweeting out, threatening, what was it? I think it was Powell, right?
Yeah. He wanted negative rates for the first time ever.
How can you enjoy all the growth and the benefits here, and then when things crash, one, it's under a president that can another great, not to dig too far into foreign policy. Are you guys pretty familiar with how the Afghanistan pullout and everything came to be?
A little bit,
Those rounds of agreements in Doha that were signed between the United States and the Taliban that completely excluded the Afghan government, and we're all done on Trump's timetable. All of that was set up in his presidency, and then Biden comes in. Well, what's he supposed to do? Surge troops back?
Exactly.
And then
there's no winning for Biden. He couldn't have won that situation regardless. And it's like going back to the economy. You can always pick and choose economic stats to make the economy look good or bad. There's so many stats, but the one stat in Economics 101, the first thing you learn, the true measure of the economy is real GDP per capita, which is the amount of GDP your country is making in real dollars, not in, taking inflation into account, per person who lives in that country. And right now, I believe it's at record highs. If not record highs, it's definitely higher than any time under Trump's presidency. So that's the stat. That's the one stat that is a real true stat of economic performance.
Sure.
Inflation
might not encapsulate all the individual people in an economy.
Right. Exactly. There's always every individual. There's always going to be people struggling. There's always going to be people flourishing. During the Great Depression, there were people who were flourishing. Right. Like, people were doing really good during the Great Depression. That doesn't mean the economy is good.
Sure.
And there's always the anecdotes that people can come up with.
Did you give any credence to the vibe session theories that a lot of people, even today, I'll see people in my chat will say like, oh, Destiny, you're out of touch. You don't understand. Like, milk is $15 a gallon and eggs are still $20 a carton. Like, you get all these ridiculous prices. Like, okay, well, when you look at the data, it seems really hard to find a lot of this. Like, there is inflation for sure, but wages are growing too. Do you think that when it comes to Americans' views on the economy, I don't know where you guys live, do you think that people are genuinely having huge problems? Do you think a lot of it is just a reflection of the media they consume, or do you think it's a mix of both?
Wages whenever there's inflation, it takes a while for wages to catch up, but they do usually. And inflation went up; these people aren't making as much money, so everything's more expensive for them. But over time, I guarantee you that within another year or two, wages are going to probably surpass what we saw. Surpass the inflation, and people are going to be doing better than they were before.
I mean, I think last month, March, I think wages increased 5.1% year over year, and I think inflation's at 3.2%.
So it's going to catch up where it's going to be on par. The total wage growth and total inflation will be about the same, probably wages slightly higher.